there is actually a sutta that I would like to discuss with you, but I'll do it only in, say, an easygoing way, as opposed to what I intend to do with Chaitan later, is to go into this same sutta in great detail and even into the Pali. All right.
Okay.
The name, um, uh, let me bring it up so I can be correct about it. Mhm. Okay. It's actually in the Samyutta Nikaya, number 46.54. And I'll send you a link.
Oh, that's perfect.
Mm. That's what I need to get. Okay. Okay. Have you got it?
Yep.
Yeah, I would not bother for you to turn the poly on. We won't work with that too much. But you can see that it is the Metta Sagagatha Sutta.
Okay.
All right. But the 46 is not in the section that you would expect. That in fact, 46 in the Samyutta Nikaya is about the Sambhojana. And so that's an interesting point right away. If you, in other words, if you're looking through the book and you find a section on Sambhojana and then you find a sutta in there, that's an interesting curiosity. Um, and that uh, basically the way of starting out is to say that metta was a practice that did exist both before and concurrently with the Buddha outside of Buddhism, as well as many people who practiced metta joined the Buddha's organization and continued to practice metta, and that they were generally, if you look at the Anapanasati Sutta, you can see that in fact the metta practitioners are invited to practice Anapanasati.
Hmm.
All right. Now, one of the most important things about Anapanasati is that it is the method and practice of the Eightfold Noble Path, and that we practice Anapanasati for the fulfillment of the four foundations of mindfulness, the Satipatthana, and that the Satipatthana is practiced to fulfillment for the fulfillment of the Sambhojana, the seven factors of enlightenment.
Okay.
And the seven factors of enlightenment are practiced for the knowledge and vision and deliverance, or moksha, or vimutti, which means escape or freedom, deliverance, let us say, in a way, the really above ground railroad, as opposed to the underground railroad to freedom. All right. So when we understand that, we also, and we'll get into the details of it, but there is a major relationship between the Eightfold Noble Path and the Sambhojana. That in fact the Sambhojana is the fulfillment of the Eightfold Noble Path, and in that way you can see why it's arranged the way that it is, because the practice of the Eightfold Noble Path is not the result, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So Basically, what we're starting with is this Metta Sutta that is in the um, Sambhojana section of the Samyutta Nikaya. So I'll go ahead and just read it to you if you don't mind.
All
At
right.
one time, the Buddha was staying in the land of the Kalashians, where they have a town called, oh, I'll skip that one. They Then several mendicants robed up in the morning, taking their their robes, and entered that town for alms. Then it occurred to him, uh, it's too early to wander for alms in this area. Why don't we go to the area of the wanderers who follow other paths? I'm actually making some changes here in the way that I'm reading it because I already know the Pali, and, and I'm reading it according to the Pali, not
Ah, I
according
see.
to the way it is written. For instance, there's no reference to the word monastery at all. The
Hmm.
word that's used is a pleasure grove, a garden, a park,
It somehow
especially
sounds
given.
nicer.
It does, doesn't it? Then they went there to the wanderers who follow other paths and exchange greetings with those wanderers there. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, they sat down to the side, and the wanderers asked them. This is the wanderers speaking. This is that other group. Reverend Sir, the ascetic Gautama teaches his disciples like this. This is not what the Buddhist monks are saying. This is what other people say that Gautama teaches, which is what they do also. Come, mendicants, give up these five hindrances, corruptions of the heart that weaken wisdom. Med, uh, Meditate, spreading a heart full of love to one direction and to the second and to the third and to the fourth, in the same way above, below, across, and everywhere, all around. Spread a heart full of love to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. Okay. You have more than likely heard something very similar to that, if not that exact quote,
Yeah.
in their various translations. Then they say, meditate, spreading a heart full of compassion to one direction, to the second, to the third, to the fourth, in the same way above, across, below, everywhere, all around. Spread a heart full of compassion to the whole world. Now, in this sutta, the Pali actually is karuna. I'll have to break into a little bit of Pali. Karuna is the word. The next one is meditate, spreading a heart full of rejoicing to one direction, to the second, to the third, to the fourth, in the same way above, below, across, everywhere, all around. Spread a heart full of rejoicing to the whole world. Abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. Now, actually, I make this particular sentence here quite an important part of the practice for those who have already gained some good skills in Anapanasati.
Hmm.
Once we have joy, with a heart already full of joy, then we can express that in one or another direction, wherever we are, even to the point that you're sitting in a car and you pull up to a stoplight and there's some kids in the back seat of the other car. You can spread joy to them. You can knock on the window to get their attention, and then you can do this or all kinds of things and spread joy. Okay. And so the problem with it is that you have to have a heart full of it. Now, the
I see.
word
Yeah.
heart, huh?
Yeah.
Now, the word heart full of rejoicing, actually, the word here is actually the word sita. which is actually the mind, but it's the part of the mind that has emotions. That in the Thai, they often will make a distinction as to how they're going to translate that word sita. I'm glad to say that in this case, probably because just the context, that he did get it right. Using the word heart here is the right. And instead of spreading a mind full of rejoicing, it should be said a heart full. In other words, you actually feel it. This is a feeling of joy. It's not mental or intellectual in any way.
Okay.
Then they say, meditate spreading a heart full of equanimity to one direction, to the second, to the third, to the fourth, in the same way above, below, across, everywhere, all around. They spread a heart full of equanimity to the world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and goodwill, or free of enmity and free of ill will. So, one of the things that we can look at, and you've probably heard this before, they're actually pointing in 6 directions. The 4
Yeah, I was just going to ask
directions of
about
the
that.
compass.
It's kind of weird how they specify all these directions all these times, you know?
Right, okay. These are actually the 6 points of the compass. North, south, east, west, longitude, or let us say altitude up and altitude down. Now, these 6 areas or these 6 directions actually have, let us say, a philosophical or metaphorical base to them,
Mm.
in the sense that there will be people, there will be friends and family on left and right side. There will be business people you deal with in front, and there will be those in the back who are trying to stab you in the back. There are those below you which you are running their lives, and there are those above you who rule yours. Okay,
Mm.
politicians or priests or whatever. Okay, so these are the 6 directions, and having to do with those groups of people. I thought you would already have known that.
I guess I didn't think about it enough. But I do remember in the TWIM instructions, they say, like, just like it says in that passage, to, at a certain point, I'm sure far beyond where I am, you sort of send that feeling out in all these directions separately. That's like part of the process. So I was just curious where
Well,
that came from.
let us almost think of it kind of like a disco ball covered with mirrors, and you have various lights shining on it so that as it spins around, that the light, kind of in a stroboscopic effect, goes all over the place, just moves all around. Okay, that's the way to think about it. Um, so how we can see that in practice is from the perspective of the Buddha has the word adventitious defilements, and what he means by that is that that defilements will come up according to them taking advantage. In other words, they have an opportunity.
Mm.
Okay. You will also have an opportunity in the same way with these 6 different directions of these 6 kind of people. So when you're with the boss, he's up, but you still relate to him as if he were you. There's the guy trying to stab you in the back, and when you relate to him, you relate to him with kindness and free of ill will, etc., like that. When you deal with the people who work for you or service workers, and you could even think of it like that in the sense of a checkout clerk at a grocery store.
Mm.
She's there doing her job, and her job is to service you, and you need to treat her with all due respect. Okay, so these are the various ways that we can see that. Now, with this issue of equanimity, a lot of people misunderstand what that word means. And in fact, we could cover the Brahma Viharas in a separate talk, but we're going in a different direction right now for integration of practice. But equanimity is, in fact, I look at it like this. I think of it in the sense of sea legs. An old salt, an old sailor on a fairly small ship at sea can walk from one end to the other without any event. But a landlubber who does not have sea legs will not be able to walk from one end of the ship without having several events. You may have to grab a hold of that rope and cling on for a minute. He may heave over the side as an event on the way.
Yeah, I hope there's a
Right.
rope, right?
Right, exactly. He may go over the side, and that would be quite an event. But the one who has equanimity then sees everything that happens as something that they can handle.
Hmm.
This equanimity is really the winner's attitude. And the winner also not just the attitude of the winner in general or in the way that you would think of it, but the winner in the sense of really, you've heard it expressed this way, that a truly strong person doesn't have to demonstrate his strength.
Hmm.
But on the way to becoming a really strong person, he was really into demonstrating it. But then when he finally gets it, that he is in fact strong, he doesn't have to demonstrate it anymore. So this issue of equanimity is beyond the showing off.
Okay.
It's when we're satisfied. It's when we really have it. Okay? And this is a skill to be developed when the heart is full of satisfaction or full of equanimity. The Pali word, by the way, is upekkha, and that I'm not really sure how they came to the word equanimity, because that word without Buddhism nobody uses those words.
Well, it's perfect then, right?
Pardon?
Well, it's perfect then, right?
Except that nobody has a clear definition of what it means.
I guess maybe they thought it gave them an opportunity to redefine it as the Pali.
But that's the problem, you see, is that it's not defined. It's not defined generally.
Right.
Okay. The word love, for instance, it has fairly clear definitions in our language, and it has a whole lot more in the use of the word with desire than it does with kindness. In other words, when you love someone, that means that you're doing something for them to get their love back. The boy tells the girl, I love you. What he means is, I want you. And so all of our language is built around that. And so love is not a very good word to put into this idea of metta. That metta is actually just a heart full of joy that we spread around. And that heart of joy means that I'm joyful even if a catastrophe happens. But really, the catastrophe is only in the sense of someone would call it a catastrophe. If you don't call it a catastrophe, then perhaps it's not a catastrophe. Maybe it's just another event, another experience. And when you've had enough of experience, you recognize that, okay, people will call some experience a catastrophe and other ones will call it something else. But an experience never lasts. They come and they go. But if I've had an experience and then I want that experience again, then I'm grasping and clinging. In other words, I've lost my balance. Okay, that experience is in fact what a lot of people are looking for. But when someone has real sea legs, they don't have experiences. They just have what they're doing, not much of anything in the moment.
Here's a question for you.
Okay.
Do you think you can have real equanimity if you don't have joy already?
No, and the answer to that was laid out in the order in which they're taught. And we'll see that in just a moment, too. Okay. The next line, which is one that I referred to earlier, we too teach our disciples in just the same way. In other words, this is a teaching that comes from outside of Buddhism.
Hmm.
And then they go through and redo it. But not only did the translator not translate it, he even lipsticized much of the Pali. But you can still get the little bit in there, especially verse 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5. You can see the word karuna and mudita and upeka stand right out. Oh, you don't. You don't have the Pali on, so sorry about
I was
that.
wondering where I could turn on like the
Here's
verse
how you
numbers.
turn on the Pali. You go to the top of the page, and you will see a settings button.
Sure.
And and when you put your mouse on it on rollover, it says text settings. You click that, and there you go. Okay, you turn on your textual information, and then you view original text and translation line by line, is the way I normally do it.
Line by line, okay.
Line by line. Then you activate the Pali word lookup from Pali to English, and we're not going to use the Chinese. And then you, at the bottom of the thing, you scroll to the right or to the remember the settings, and then you click X.
That's funny. I'm learning Chinese right now. Maybe I'll come back to that. Is it? Is that just translated into Chinese? It wasn't. It was never originally in Chinese, right?
There was a whole lot of original stuff and a whole lot of translations from into Chinese from the very early days. Some of the translations into Chinese are better than what was left around in India, and so they have retranslated some of the Chinese original old stuff back into Pali and fit it in with some of the stuff that they have. Yep, that's exactly correct. Some of the translations into into Chinese are very old. So, getting down to 4.4 is where we had left off. You can see now down there. In fact, at verse 4.2, you can actually see Avaso Pancha Nirvana. Okay, that's the 5 hindrances right there. So they're just repeating what they taught before. And then on the second line is when the word metta is used. Okay, so roll over the word metta under 4.2, and you'll see that the word metta is actually translated as benevolence or generosity, amity, giving. You can't give something you don't have. Okay? The Sahagatha means endowed or connected with or filled with. Those are the kind of words that you would use for that whole word. Sanghagatina would be, you could say, loaded down with metta.
Right. So one having metta can give it away.
Not a one. In the endowment is there without one being endowed, if you think about it. All right, no self. Okay, Satina then is the word uh, for purpose. But anyway, let's not do Pali right now. I just wanted to point out the Karuna, Mudita, and Upika down to 45. And so this is actually just a major repetition, exactly line by line from the stuff that we had just read in English above. And so after they do that, then they ask this question, and this is it. This is the whole point that you've been asking me. What then is the difference between the aesthetic Gautama's teachings and the instructions and ours? Okay, because they have heard that there is metta being practiced by some of the monks that are associated with Gautama. But here's what happened. Those bhikkhus neither approved nor dismissed that statement of the wanderers who follow other paths. Rather, they just got up from their seats thinking, we will learn the meaning of this statement from the Buddha himself. In other words, they didn't get into any arguments with them. They left. Then after the meal, but they did stay, I guess, for the meal. Or maybe they went on alms round. We don't know what happened. But after the meal, they went back to the Buddha, bowed and sat one side, and told him what had happened. And here you go again, all in detail. Now, all of this detail, again, is in fact done for the purpose of understanding and memorization, and that it would be better in our Pali translations into English that they actually translate the Pali into English instead of trying to save space or time. Let people read through this stuff over and over and over again, so that we get down to now we find that same statement at 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, and 8.5. And so they go and tell the Buddha line by line what they said. This is the third time now. The first time they said, this is what we understand Gautama to teach. Then they said, this is what we do. And then they ask, what's the difference? And so the Buddhist monks then go to the Buddha and give him the whole story the third time. If they're going to be doing mudita, karuna, upeka over and over and over like this, that's an indication that it has power and importance.
Sounds like it.
But it does also understand that this is not the teaching of the Buddha. And so now we might begin to find out why. And so here we begin. Let's go down to 11.1. And it looks like this is the Buddha talking. Ekamvando bhikkhave. Yes. Okay. So the Buddha is addressing the Buddhas, his monks. When wanderers who follow other paths say this, you should say this to them. But reference, how is the heart released by metta developed? Here he dropped into using the word love, but in fact, it's the Pali word is metta sitamo vimutti. That sito is actually the mind, so it actually means a mind that is free to have metta. Then they ask, Kim gatati hoti, Kim parama, Kim phala, Kim periyusana. Okay, that Kim phala means what is the fruit or what's the benefit. And the Kim periyusana is not the really good word for the word end. A much, much better word would be what is the conclusion.
Okay.
Okay, open-ended. You think of end as an event. Okay. You could also say, what is the result?
Hmm.
Okay. But you could say, which way are we going? What's the high point? What's the value of it? And what's the point? What's the purpose of this? That's the question that the Buddha would ask. How is the heart released by love developed? Okay. Because earlier that it said, number one, hindrances removed. That's a major key.
Right.
Okay. Also, having the hindrances removed is a major key for first jhana. Therefore, if you are practicing metta correctly, it will be the first jhana. That will be the destination and the fruit. And you pretty well already know I'm really big on first jhana, and so was the Buddha. But there's still something missing. And then he asked, how is the heart released by compassion developed? In other words, how do we do these things? Because a lot of people will sit, I mean, I've seen instructions. I've been to retreats where they say, almost in unison for a while, may all beings be happy.
Yeah.
But that doesn't do it. That does not bring on the joy, really. How is the heart released by compassion is even more difficult. In fact, I've never seen them actually practice something that will release the heart into compassion or sympathetic joy, mudita, nor into equanimity.
Can I ask something real quick?
Sure, sure.
Maybe I'm overanalyzing, but like, what exactly do they mean by heart's release in this case?
Um, the Pali word I'm looking at right now is upeka sito vimutti. The word vimutti is the word for freedom, and the mind is released. And I'm not sure that the word by is the correct word. How is the heart uh, released by equanimity developed? I would say um, the word released, by the way, is the word for vimutti, and there's not a lot of problem with that. But
Okay.
how is the heart released for equanimity to be developed would be a better translation.
Mm.
That is not released by equanimity, it's released. And how is a released heart developed? So that it can practice upekkha.
Okay. So it's not. So you're saying you have to release the heart first, and then as later or as a result, you have upekkha.
Okay. That's why they're talking about what is the destination? What is the apex? What is the fruit? Because the fruit of Sito Vimutti is, in fact, upekkha. It's almost like that if you're practicing metta, you have the cause-effect system backwards.
Mm.
You're developing the end result, but the end result is actually done through a cause. If you develop the cause, then the result will happen. Okay, so basically, that happens, by the way, a lot. I see that quite often, that people get things backward. You get things, they call it the cart before the horse and other things like that. Okay, so when we say, how is the heart released by equanimity developed, it's got it backwards. But if you say, how is the heart freed, how is a freed heart developed for equanimity?
Okay.
And then the Buddha says questions like this. Questioned like this, the wanderers who follow other paths would be stumped, and in addition, they would get frustrated. Okay, so when you say how the way that I'm translating it, that would be possibly frustrating because we're rephrasing it to get it right. We don't develop equanimity in order to release the heart. We release the heart so that it can have equanimity. Questions like this, the wanderers who follow other paths um, would be stumped and, in addition, would get frustrated. Why is that? Because they're out of their element. In other words, this is the questions you ask is too much. And when we use the following words, we have to understand that this is a bit magical the way that it's translated, but we're actually talking about real things. I don't see anyone in this world with his gods, Maras, Brahmins, and those are actually people. In fact, the word gods here is actually, I think it's Deva. I haven't looked at this one. Yeah, Deva. Okay. The word Deva does not translate to a god. The word Deva translates in the Pali the way that we would use Deva in Hollywood. A king is referred to as a Deva. In fact,
Okay.
they would refer to him directly as an honorific Deva. Okay. So, the Maras here are just, let us call them bad actors. It doesn't have to be a devil. But this is how it is actually. I don't see anyone in this world with the aristocracy, with the lowlife, with the priest, this population with its aesthetics and recluses, its aristocrats and ordinary people who could provide a satisfying answer to this question except for the Buddha or his disciple or someone who has heard it from them. And how is the heart released for metta developed? What is its destination, apex, fruit, and end? It's when a mendicant develops the heart's release for love together with, and here's the list, the awakening factors of mindfulness, the awakening fact, actually, the word that Bhikkhu Bodhi translates is very, very telling. It really gets it when he says unremitting mindfulness. Because remember, this is Sambojana. This is actually the practice and fulfillment of the Eightfold Noble Path. So the Eightfold Noble Path is a set of skills to be developed. When those skills are developed, then you have them as factors of awakening.
Okay.
And that would be unremitting mindfulness, unremitting investigation of, I wouldn't call it principles, I'd call it investigation of the situation.
Okay.
You also have the word energy, then we have the word piti or rapture, then we have the word relaxation, which they're using as tranquility. And then we have the word samadhi, which they're wrongly translating as immersion. And then equanimity, which is now part of the path here. In other words, if we have these factors developed, then equanimity will be there if you have it unremittingly through unremitting mindfulness, unremitting investigation, unremitting energy. Now, this word energy actually, we can look at each one of these and we can see, in fact, there's the Eightfold Noble Path sticking right out in front of us. Sati. That's right sati, or right waking up. The
Okay.
next one is investigation. That's right view, to keep investigating, to keep knowing, to keep looking. The next one would be right effort. When right effort becomes unremitting, then it is actually energetic.
Hmm.
Okay? It's almost like a very weak man who goes into the gym, and he just, because someone left it on the floor, a 5 kilogram dumbbell, and he's going to pick it up and put it on the shelf over there. That takes effort for him to pick that up. But 2 or 3 years later, or maybe someone who has been practicing for 2 or 3 years, they can pick up that 5 kilogram dumbbell easy.
Sure.
Easy, right? So when our effort is developed as a skill, it becomes actual energetic.
Okay.
That as soon as we think about it, of course, we're naturally just going to take a deep breath. We're just naturally going to throw out the hindrances if they're there. Okay? With that then comes, and they're using the word pity here, but we have to really understand this from the concept of how we practice Anapanasati to develop piti, which is also the same thing as sukha, which we can also use as joy. That in fact, he would probably have been better in this translation to not have used the word rapture, because nobody knows what the word rapture means,
Yeah.
especially now that the Christians have it.
I was just thinking about that.
And to them, rapture is an event.
Mm-hmm.
But with us, it's just good feeling. Okay? Tranquility, actually, this is step 4 of Anapanasati, which is the Pali word comes from our word passive. Tranquility is not a good translation. Just like rapture, not a good translation.
Yeah.
Perhaps the worst of all is the word he's using for samadhi is immersion. But the word samadhi does not mean either immersion or concentration. What it means is collected together. Unification of mind is exactly the right way to look at it.
Okay.
And when you have unification of mind, when you're not pulled this way or that way, like the floor of a ship that's rocking back and forth while you're trying to go from one end to the other, if you have unification of mind, which means you're paying attention, you're watching where you're going, then it will become eventless in your transportation. Therefore, you will have equanimity, which is the sea legs, the upekkha.
Right.
Okay, so this is how this is practiced. But now he says it relies on seclusion. It relies on fading away in cessation and ripens in letting go. Wow! Wow! The Buddha actually is referring here, or whoever wrote this, to the Anapanasati Sutta directly.
Mm.
Especially fading away cessation and ripening and letting go is in fact step 14, 15, and 16 of Anapanasati. What is it that fades away? Every event, every experience. Every experience that you have will end. It'll fall apart. Therefore, there is no reason to cling to any experience that we've had.
Okay.
And yet, our whole society is event and experience oriented. We have all
Pretty
kinds of
much.
events, right? From marriages to funerals to graduation ceremonies and all kinds of things like that in ordinary culture. And yet here it looks like that what the Buddha is really referring to is let's be in the here now and not cling to those things which we used to be impressed by. That's where, in other words, um, if I'm impressed by something, then I'm not equanimous. I'm not. It's bowled me over. It's knocked me down. I'm not up
Okay.
to it. Okay, this is the inflection that we're getting with this equanimity. Means that it's like another expression: water off a duck's back.
Hmm.
If they wish, I'll read on. May I meditate, perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive. That's what they do. If they wish, may I meditate, perceiving the unrepulsive in repulsive. That's what they do. In fact, this is what part of the practice that the Buddha did in the charnel ground, but he stopped doing that
Okay.
to not have the students go and spend a lot of time in looking at at repulsive things. Uh, so um, some people will say that the way to do that, though, is uh, to, okay, an example would be how young men could see young girls. We always see them as not repulsive. But according to the traditions that I know that goes along with the Buddha, that you would say that, oh, if you want to see who you're marrying, go look at her mother. And then if you want to see what you're going to wind up with, go look at her grandmother.
Wow.
Do you understand what I mean with that then?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we actually begin to see the repulsive in the unrepulsive. She's going to get old. And the very thing that makes her so unrepulsive is that she's young. Or at least she's working really hard to appear young.
Yeah.
And so if we can see the reality of the situation, we can see both the repulsive and the unrepulsive. And so he's talking about, yeah, they can do that because that's, in a way, part of the metta practice is seeing the unrepulsive in the repulsive. That guy that's stabbing me in the back, he's repulsive. Can I see him as unrepulsive?
Okay.
If they wish, may I meditate, staying equanimous, mindful, and aware, rejecting both the repulsive and the repulsive. Then that's what they'll do. Okay, in this sense, the repulsive means that whatever experience that comes by, whether that experience is repulsive or unrepulsive, they just let it go. We reject kind of both of them. This is how we get into the state of equanimity, is by uh, actually a very good expression would be been there, done that.
Hmm. Yeah, I was wondering if you think rejecting is the right word. It almost sounds like aversion, which I don't know if
Hmm.
that's what they intended.
Dropping it away or forget about it would be a
Not
better
holding on
way,
to it.
right? Not holding on to it. Uh, okay, the apex of the heart's release is beautiful. I say, for the mendicant who has not penetrated to a higher knowledge. In other words, when one does have that point in time when they do have metta, that their countenance is quite beautiful. And how is the heart released? By compassion developed? And then they go through the same things by seeing the repulsive and the unrepulsive. Uh, and so we down to the apex of the heart's released by compassion. When the mendicant develops a heart released by rejoicing together with the awakening factors of mindfulness, investigation, energy, rapture, tranquility, immersion, and equanimity, which rely on seclusion, fading away, and cessation, and again ripens in letting go. Okay, so unless those that are practicing metta are not also practicing these stages that they're mentioning in the Anapanasati Sutta for the fulfillment of the Sambojana, then it's going to be kind of temporary, or it's going to be difficult to develop. It's not going to be really easy to do.
Okay.
But you can also see that if we're talking about the kind of feelings that we're sort of pointing at when we talk about rapture. Let me look into Pali here and see. It's part of the ellipse. He left it out. Which means we'll have to go find it someplace else. One of the things that you can think of with piti is that piti is kind of like a continuum, and that at one end of the continuum is sukha, and the other continuum is piti, and that the common factors that piti and sukha have are extensive in the sense of safety, security, contentment, satisfaction. But piti has an extra element of, let us call it excitement or energy. The difference, let us say it this way, the difference between piti and sukha is the difference that I'm saying now. Piti is yippee, and sukha is
Okay.
Okay. And we can see that continuum in normal places. An example of that is when the touchdown or the score is made, some of the fans will jump up in the air, throw their hands, they cheer and they shout, and then they sit down and they look at the scoreboard and they'll nod with each other and they'll move back and forth. They go from piti to sukha, right? The same thing happens at New Year's on Times Square and other places where the ball comes down, and then when it gets to zero, everybody cheers and yells, "Oh, we finally got over that bad old year. We got a new one now." And then they start playing the music Auld Lang Syne, and everybody rocks, okay, back and forth. So this is piti and sukha. The piti is almost like you could say the popping of the cork of the bottle of summer wine or champagne or something. And then the sukha is the drinking of the rest of the bottle. Okay. Another example of it, which this is kind of gross, is when a gun is fired, you'll have an explosion of sound, the bullet and everything, including a lot of fire, comes out the end of the barrel. That's the piti. Followed by then, especially if you've got gunpowder, a haze of smoke around. And so that haze of smoke, that afterglow, then would be the sukha, which means then that piti and sukha are deeply connected. It's very difficult for piti then to not fall into satisfaction. Imagine, for instance, a race where you have like the 100-yard dash at the Olympics. The guy who's winning the race, if he's actually winning the race, he knows it, right immediately in that second before he touches that ribbon that he's got to cross, right? He knows it already. And you can see it in his gestures. One of the things is that he's just running because he's running. He's continuing to run, but oh no, he'll put his chest up so that his chest will hit that. Okay, that's that pity. That's that spiking of the ball.
Right. Okay.
Okay, that's the pity, right? But after that, then the runner is going to take a knee. He's going to kneel and he's going to catch his breath and he's going to feel completely satisfied. I've won. Okay, piti sukha, piti sukha. In that way, you can also see here that this tranquility is also part of the sukha that comes. First the piti, then the sukha that is completely relaxing.
Mm.
Completely relaxing. And once we become completely relaxed, especially if we're practicing this sequence on a ongoing, unremitting basis, then that's when the mind will become unified in the sense that the job that needed to be done has been done and there's no more jobs to do. So that there are no more events. The event is over.
Okay.
That's okay. And in a way, you could say all of the events are over.
Are you talking the cessation now, or?
Equanimity is going to be quite uneventful.
Okay.
All right. It would be a big event if someone came and laid a heavy weight on the scales because the scales are going to tip. But if someone has equanimity for scales, then you can come put that heavy load on it and it's not going to tip the scale.
Right. Right.
Okay. It's almost like having a wooden crate or something under the teeter-totter.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Uh, so then they go on with this repulsive and unrepulsive because that's a major aspect of the metta practice is beginning to see the unrepulsive. If they wish, may I meditate and perceive the repulsive. Let's get down. If they wish, may I meditate staying balanced, mindful, and aware. Equanimous, a better possible way to word that would be balanced.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. May I meditate staying balanced, mindful, and aware, rejecting both the repulsive and the unrepulsive. That is what they do. Uh, The apex of the heart, released by equanimity, is the dimension of nothingness, I say, for a mendicant who has not penetrated to a higher freedom. Now, what that higher freedom we're talking about here is released from even having experiences of nothing or whatever. That we begin to see things as, in fact, empty.
Okay.
I wouldn't call it a dimension of nothingness. I would rather say it is when we see things as empty. So, this sutta then is actually pointing out that the teachings of the Buddha uh, kind of incorporate and go beyond the teachings that were already there. Partly because they say that here's the two things that are said about it. One is that it's not the practice of metta is not completely liberating, but at the other side of it, it's even worse in the sense the way that this sutta is stating it is that uh, It's not maintainable. That we can practice metta, but if we're not practicing sati, then our metta will not be unremitting. And so practicing Anapanasati is the more complete method. And by doing so, we actually are incorporating kindness or benevolence. And where are we going to start with that? We're going to start with benevolence at home. But in fact, the Buddha has, in several different suttas, the Buddha is talking about friendship with Ananda. Ananda came, the sutta, by the way, I forgot the number of it, but the name of it is the Half Sutta. It's so funny. Because Ananda comes to the Buddha and says that Sariputta told him that friendship is half of the Dhamma. And the Buddha says, no, not true. That friendship is the whole of the Dhamma. Well, if you understand benevolence and enmity and friendship is all the same kind of thing, then in fact, the word for spiritual friend is Kalya Metta.
Okay.
And so metta is kind of the result of the practice rather than the cause or the work that needs to be done. But it can be cultivated, but not for the 6 directions of the compass, but rather it has to be cultivated on the inside. In other words, if you're not friendly within, so that you're friends with your own anger, you're friends with your own delusions, and you see that stuff, and it is not necessarily repulsive to you. You reject the repulsiveness, and you begin to accept yourself as the way you are. Become friends with yourself. One of the ways that we have thought about it is imagine that you've got a dog that goes out into the yard on occasion and starts barking. The owner of the dog has to go take a look to see why the dog is barking. If the dog is barking, there will be, depending upon why he's barking, and you can see why the dog is barking, you can take various actions. Right. One of the things we can do is we can call the dog off. And then when he gets off and he comes back home, we scratch his head. Good boy. Down, boy. All right. We don't kill the dog because he's barking. Right?
I hope not.
I hope not. Exactly. And so there is no reason for us then to have that same attitude about our own anger or our own frustrations or whatever like that we can learn to become friends and accept what's going on the inside. This is actually part of the practice. And that's also the part of the practice of Anapanasati, of actually gladdening the mind, step 10. Step 10 is gladdening the mind, which means we're actually throwing out the hindrances. Now, if you are actually able to throw out the hindrances and start having good, wholesome thoughts, thoughts of metta are good, wholesome thoughts. The practice of metta, when done correctly, will take someone into first jhana, but they got to kind of know what they're doing.
Okay.
You got to actually let yourself feel good. Then, in fact, I have seen occasions and heard other stories, especially of some old grumpy woman comes to the retreat and she starts practicing metta only a couple of times a day or whenever they call for it. Mostly it's in the evening. And she eventually, during the metta, becomes filled with bliss. Her tears are rolling down her eyes. everything about the countenance of this lady changes. Okay? That means that her practice is beneficial. Perhaps has to go through layers of remorse about how badly she's treated people in the past, but again, that's unrepulsive, or that's repulsive, and we don't see the repulsive as repulsive. We see it as out it goes, just another experience.
Right, yeah.
Okay. So, we can get the benefit of metta if it's practiced correctly, and that it also has a great deal of appeal to the Western mind because of Christian influences. In fact, you could go so far as to say that metta practice in Buddhism is what the Christians ought to be doing when they're being out there racist Trump supporters. Is they should have some good old loving kindness for that quarter that they have below them, the immigrants. All right?
Yeah, that'd be nice.
So, in that regard, you can see where the mindset of the Westerner, when they hear about metta and they hear the word loving kindness, it has a certain appeal. You could call that appeal, in fact, when that appeal is useful, it's inspiring. The teachings of metta is an inspiring teaching. But it's actually more practical to put into play if we practice all of Anapanasati, that there's bits and pieces missing in the metta practice. And
Okay.
because of that, it's not easily sustainable and maintainable to where that's exactly the intention with Anapanasati, of getting the mind fit for work and then keeping it fit for work by maintaining the mind is going to stay in wholesome states. Okay. And somebody would say, yeah, but I can do metta and my mind will stay in a wholesome state. Yes, but also it's quite possible for the hindrances to come back if you don't have mindfulness. Okay, so mindfulness, and also you have to investigate what the mind is doing so that you can decide, I'm only going to have thoughts of metta and not have thoughts of whatever the hindrances would be, unwholesome thoughts.
Right.
And then the next would be is that is in fact the metta practice generating piti and sukha? Do you actually feel like you can give metta? Do you have that boundless joy and you know you've got that boundless joy?
Yeah, not always. Although my intuition would be they would say I haven't practiced it long enough to have experienced it yet, you know.
Yes, you have. The first time you practice, this is it. Gladden the mind, get yourself into a really good state, and then maintain that. That's the whole practice. It's actually easy to do. And as you continue to do this, the skills that you were using to get into that state will be developed so that your effort becomes energetic. That's one of the main differences, is that in the beginning it takes a bit of effort.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because you've been in the habit of feeling bad. You've been talking yourself into feeling bad for all these years, and now it's time to talk yourself into feeling good. And so
Sounds like a
that's what
plan to me. You make it sound very simple, and I guess it is. You just have to remember.
Yes, it is. It is actually quite simple if we can remember. And so there you are, for instance, laying in bed at night, and you haven't gone to sleep, but you begin to think about what happened during the day or what you've got to do tomorrow, and then you say, wait a minute, I'm going to just lay here and enjoy the night. I do not have to make any plans or think about anything. It's just, what a nice night. Or things like, oh, what a happy family. Isn't this so nice? Okay, so we begin to have wholesome thoughts. Those wholesome thoughts actually is a kind of metta. It's a kind of benevolence. Now you're being benevolent to yourself. You've let us say, uh, given the mind less work to do. Whatever it was doing, say, you don't have to do that. You can feel good instead. So remember, you talked yourself into feeling bad, you talked yourself into feeling good.
That's right.
And now I think you understand how that you can not see them as different practices, but when you see it from metta only, you're missing some of the pieces. But when you have all of the pieces of the puzzle, there the metta is also.
Right, okay.
And karuna, and mudita, and upekkha.
Are those the Brahma Viharas that I hear about and don't really know what they are?
Well, we've just been talking about them. Karuna, that is translated into compassion. Uh, a better word, I think, would be empathy. But an even more important word to use would be that you can see what other people feel
Mm.
without having to feel what they feel. Where compassion is that you have to feel what they felt. In other words, the woman is sitting on the couch, her son has just died. And everybody will be very kind to her and everything is good. But when someone, even a stranger, sits down beside her on the couch and says, last week I just lost my son too. And he starts to cry. And now you've got compassion. That's real compassion. But that's not what we want to do because that's seeing the repulsive as repulsive. Equanimity is actually there in karuna. If we can see the situation and see how the lady is hurting, but I don't have to hurt.
Mm. Okay.
And I can give her what she needs to hear without having to feel bad the way that she does. So this is what why is that? Well, we've already got metta. We've already got the good feelings. Why am I going to squander my good feelings to feel bad just because this lady feels bad? If that's what's happening, then that's actually mudita working in reverse, in the sense that she feels bad, therefore I feel bad.
Mm.
Or someone is angry, I feel angry. I join them in their feeling state. Why do humans do this? It's instinctual. It's part of our herding instinct. It's part of our nesting instinct. It's part of our socialization. But we're talking about something higher than that now when we're talking about this kind of mudita, is that we are not engaged in the repulsive and unrepulsive, that we're just merely seeing things the way that it truly is, which
Yeah.
means we're not vibrating to that tune.
Mm.
So, if we can now keep our joy, that means that now we can spread joy. That if somebody's frustrated and angry and upset, you don't have to get frustrated, angry, upset with them. You can remain joyful. You can actually give them your joy.
Yeah, that sounds
But you
more
got to
useful
have
than just being upset.
right. You got to have a strong mind to do that, or a
Mm.
unified mind. Okay, well rehearsed, well practiced. And so that's the reason for that word in there that was mentioned called seclusion. The Buddha was actually quite big on seclusion. We have to get away from it all
Mm.
on the outside so that then we can find out what we brought in with us and get rid of that also. And so that we can develop the heart that we want to have, the heart of joy, the heart of success.
How do you know when you're ready to leave seclusion?
Uh, Unfortunately, events often happen with that. Okay. Uh, so that would be event oriented. The more important question to ask was, how do I cultivate the intention and the motivation to go into seclusion? Because you can do that. I mean, you can sit right where you are right now, close your eyes, and go into seclusion. But then something's going to bring you back out of it.
Right.
But while you're in seclusion, you can, instead of practicing whatever the hindrances are that you're used to doing, you can practice, wow, isn't this nice to be secluded? I don't have to do anything for anybody. Nobody's asking me anything. Don't have any jobs to do. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that we want to look for seclusion. Is when we can find satisfaction that the job that needed to be done's already been finished.
Mm.
If anything, the only job there is to do is to clean the hindrances out of the mind. That's the only job there is.
But
Why is that?
is that job ever finished, really?
It is every time you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hindrances will come back. Now what is your job? Get rid of the hindrances. Okay. It's almost like the question you ask is the question that the, let us say, the service attendant in the kitchen is asking. And so the chef says, go take that trash out. And he goes and takes the trash out and puts it in the alley. He comes back in and he says, is there any end to this trash? And he's asking a chef. Of course, there's no end to the trash. But you want to keep your kitchen clean, so you got to take the trash out.
Yep.
You're not going to ever get if you stop taking the trash out, what's going to happen to the kitchen?
It's gonna pile up.
Exactly. So think about it like that. Don't look for the end of it. Look for, oh, if I don't do it, then all we've got is a messy mind. But if I clean out my mind, then I've got a clean mind. And this moment is nice. But we do begin to develop some new, useful habits. New habits, new skills that eventually take over and replace the old ones, so that an example of that would be anger. In the beginning, somebody will say, I'm not angry, when they are angry. They don't even want to recognize it. But then they get on the path and then they say, wait a minute, I do not want to be angry, therefore I'm going to start watching for it. And so then a friend, next time it happens, a friend says, you sound like you're getting angry. And he says, yep, I'm going to stop that. And then later he catches himself. And then later he catches it in time so that he doesn't make a scene. And he keep his mouth shut. And then later he recognizes he can handle those bad feelings and he doesn't have to get angry at all. And then he'll look at something and say, oh, that used to make me angry all the time, and now I don't get angry. And then it comes to the point of, In other words, we've forgotten all about it.
Mm. So in that sense, we can produce less trash less often, maybe.
Right. Produce less trash less often, but you still got to take the trash out.
Okay.
I also use the example of shaving. Let's say the old guy had a really, really tough beard. He hadn't shaved, hadn't washed. It's got scabs and lice and all kinds of things in it. But somebody's finally talked him into shaving. That first shave is a trip. 4 or 5 razors and dissatisfying and not really a good shave at all. But he shaves again the next day. Then he gets a good razor and he shaves. He gets used to shaving. But he's not going to come to the point of, I'm really good at shaving now. I'm so good at shaving, the beard doesn't grow anymore. No, but we can get really good at shaving.
Okay.
Okay. Does that make more sense then?
Sure, yeah, I think it makes sense.
All right. So the skill then to be developed is how to handle the stuff, and it does kind of dwindle off if you continue to develop wholesome habits and you do not allow the mind to dwell in unwholesome thoughts and habits, then they will atrophy. That old neuron connections that you don't use anymore, when those neurons die, they won't be replaced. Some more wholesome neurons will be in service. And so it, over time, gets easier and easier. That's why we call it energy now in the Sambojjhanga, as opposed to right effort when we're still on the path.
Okay. So I had a question from earlier, I think. Let me see. You were talking about sukha and piti, this spectrum. I was wondering, I'm guessing you're referring to the feelings or the mind state that arises during the first jhana, is that right?
Yes.
So then...
These are flags that are flown in first jhana.
Okay. So does that all happen in the first jhana? And like, what do you do when that happens anyway? If you're in sukha eventually.
Enjoy. Maintain. Keep that state. Investigate it. Get to like it a lot. Keep wholesome thoughts to maintain that. Thoughts of metta. Wholesome thoughts.
Okay.
But one of the things, though, that I think that is kind of missing in the metta practice is the Four Noble Truths, which actually has to do with seeing dukkha as dukkha. You have to see dukkha as dukkha. You cannot pretend that it's not repulsive. It is.
Okay.
That unwholesome is unwholesome. We have to see it as such. To where strictly the metta practice is just trying to see everything as metta and take no stock of is it repulsive or not repulsive. You can use that quality as I've been demonstrating. But in a way, we have to see, really, through investigation. We can't just turn a blind eye and say, I'm going to practice metta. You have to really investigate.
Okay.
To keep the mind open, to keep the trash out. Okay. Well, this has been a delightful conversation, Brian, and I'm glad that we are kind of working this out, because what you're talking about all along is a really important kind of thing. Because you're kind of confused as, do I do this practice or that practice? No, it's the same practice.
Okay.
When it's done correctly, you'll get even more benefit out of it.
That sounds good to me.
All right. Well, we'll see you later.
All right. Thank you.
You go practice and go have fun. Don't have one. have a big happy now.
All right. Take care now.
Okay, see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.